Welcome to this peaceful moment. Here, you will discover stories inspired by the quiet beauty of Japan. Each tale is like a soft breeze through a bamboo grove, carrying you away from the worries of the day. Imagine the scent of blooming cherry blossoms and the gentle flow of a nearby clear stream. Let these words and sounds cradle your mind in calm and serenity. Tonight, permit yourself to drift into a restful sleep. Let us begin this journey together. Whispers of the Hidden Garden. Prologue: The Forgotten Gate. At the far edge of a quiet town, behind walls of crumbling stone and ivy so thick it seemed to breathe, there lay a garden long forgotten. No maps marked it, no paths led to it. The elders of the town spoke of it only in half-remembered murmurs. A place where silence held secrets, where wind carried voices that did not belong to the living. Children dared each other to peer through the gaps in the ivy-covered walls, but all they saw were shadows and tangled leaves. None were brave enough to climb inside except for a girl named Aiko. Aiko was different. Where others saw ruin, she saw mystery. Where others feared silence, she heard promise. The whispers of the hidden garden seemed to call her, faint but insistent, each time she passed by. And one summer evening, as the sun dipped low, and the cicadas cried their last songs of the day, she pressed her hands against the cold stone wall and stepped inside. The first whisper. The air inside was cooler than outside, as if the garden lived in a season of its own. Dust motes hung in golden light, drifting like forgotten prayers. Branches arched overhead, creating a green cathedral of leaves. Aiko walked cautiously, her sandals brushing against moss-covered stones. She expected silence, but instead, she heard it a whisper. It was soft, almost imperceptible, like breath through reeds. Words formed and dissolved in the air. "Welcome back." Aiko spun around. "Who's there?" Only the trees stared down at her. But the whisper came again, clearer now, from the direction of an overgrown pond at the garden's heart. Compelled, she stepped closer. The surface of the pond was still, but in it she saw not her own reflection, but the image of a boy she did not know. His eyes were deep as night, his face calm as stone. "Do not be afraid," the voice said, though the boy's lips did not move. "You have entered the hidden garden. Few ever find their way here. The keeper of memories." The boy revealed himself as Ren, a spirit bound to the garden. Long ago, he had been a child of the town, much like Aiko, but he had wandered into the garden and never returned. "I am not lost," he explained gently, when Aiko gasped in sorrow. "I chose to stay. This garden holds all that the world forgets: memories, voices, dreams. It whispers them into the air, so they are never truly gone." Aiko's eyes widened. "So when I hear whispers here, they're memories?" Ren nodded. "Yes. Some are soft, like the laughter of children who once played here. Some are sorrowful, like farewells spoken beneath these trees. They drift until someone listens. And now, you are listening. For hours, Aiko sat with Ren by the pond, listening as faint voices rose from the leaves, from the flowers, from the stones beneath their feet. Some spoke of joy, others carried pain, but all shimmered with truth. When night fell, Ren faded back into the pond's reflection, leaving Aiko both bewildered and enchanted. Between two worlds, days passed, then weeks. Aiko returned to the hidden garden whenever she could. Outside its walls, her life was ordinary: school, chores, the chatter of neighbors. Inside, time seemed to bend. Hours passed like moments, moments stretched into eternity. Ren taught her to walk slowly, to breathe deeply, to place her hand on the bark of a tree and hear its story. She learned that even stones whispered, though their voices were deep and ancient. The world is full of voices, Ren told her. But most people are too hurried to hear. The garden teaches us to listen. Aiko smiled. Then I want to keep learning. I want to hear everything. Ren looked at her, his eyes soft but shadowed. Be careful, Aiko. Some whispers are heavy. Some are too much for a single heart. The burden of whispers. One evening, Aiko stumbled upon a corner of the garden she had never seen before. There, wilted flowers and broken stones surrounded a withered tree. The air felt heavy, thick with sorrow. The whispers here were louder, harsher. They spoke of regrets, of betrayals, of grief so deep it seemed bottomless. Aiko clutched her ears, but the voices seeped through anyway. Tears streamed down her face, though she did not know why. Ren appeared beside her. I warned you. These are the burdens left behind, the shadows people could not carry with them. Why do they stay? Aiko sobbed. Because forgetting does not erase pain. It only hides it. The garden remembers what people wish to forget. Aiko trembled. Then why let me hear them? Ren's gaze was steady. Because you are strong enough. The garden does not call those who cannot bear its truth. The Festival of Lanterns. Outside the garden, the town prepared for its annual festival. Lanterns lit the streets, drums echoed through the air, and laughter spilled from every corner. But Aiko could not shake the weight of the whispers she had heard. While others danced and sang, she slipped away to the hidden garden. Ren was waiting. Why are you not with the others? He asked. Because I can't stop hearing them, she admitted. Even outside the garden, the whispers follow me. Ren smiled sadly. That is the mark of one who has listened deeply. Once you begin, you cannot unhear the world. He held out his hand. Come. Tonight, the garden will show you its truest face. The night of 1,000 whispers. The garden was alive in ways Aiko had never seen. Fireflies shimmered like stars caught between leaves. The pond glowed faintly, its surface rippling with light. And everywhere, the whispers rose not sorrowful this time, but melodic, weaving together like a song. Ren's voice joined them, low and steady. These are the memories of joy, of love, of hope. For every burden, there is also light. Do you hear how they balance? Aiko closed her eyes, letting the voices wash over her. She heard lullabies sung to sleeping children, vows whispered between lovers, laughter spilling over picnics long ago. The heaviness in her chest eased. "Yes," she whispered back. "I hear it. It's beautiful." Ren looked at her with quiet pride. "Then you understand. The garden does not only hold sorrow. It holds all that is human. The choice." As seasons turned, Aiko grew older. Her visits to the hidden garden became part of her life, as natural as breathing. But Ren remained the same, unchanging, bound to the whispers of the garden. And Aiko began to realize something painful. One day, she would leave him behind. The garden itself seemed to sense her thoughts. One evening, the whispers spoke directly to her. "Stay. Belong. Become one with us." Ren's expression was troubled. "They call you because they sense your bond. You could remain, as I did, living in whispers. But it means leaving the world outside forever." Aiko's heart ached. "Ren, if I stay, what happens to my family? My life? They will forget you, as the world forgets all things," Ren said quietly. "But the garden will remember." The farewell. On the night of her 17th birthday, Aiko returned to the garden with a lantern in her hands. She found Ren by the pond, waiting as always. "I have decided," she said softly. Ren's eyes searched hers. "And? I cannot stay. I belong to the world outside, the people who love me, the life I must live. But I will never forget this place. I will carry its whispers in my heart, and perhaps share them, so they are never lost." Ren smiled, though his eyes glistened. "Then you have learned the garden's greatest secret, that its whispers are not meant to trap you, but to guide you back to the world with deeper ears." They stood together in silence, as the lantern's light reflected in the pond. "Will I ever see you again?" Aiko whispered. Ren's figure shimmered. "Every time you listen closely to water, to wind, to silence, I will be there." The keeper of whispers. Years later, Aiko grew into a woman known for her wisdom and compassion. She became a teacher, a storyteller, one who urged others to pause and listen to the voices of the past, to the stories hidden in quiet places. When her students asked where she had learned such things, she only smiled. From a hidden garden that whispers, if you dare to listen. And sometimes, in the stillness of night, when wind brushed through the trees outside her window, she thought she heard him. Ren's voice, soft and enduring, carried on the endless whispers of the hidden garden. Snowfall over the stone lanterns. Prologue. The garden in winter. The temple garden was silent beneath the first heavy snow of the season. The air was still, as if holding its breath, and every sound seemed muffled under a thick blanket of white. The stone lanterns, worn smooth by centuries of rain and wind, now bore soft crowns of snow. Their carved surfaces transformed into fragile sculptures of winter. From a distance, they seemed to glow faintly, not from fire or light, but from the quiet dignity of time itself. Akira stood at the wooden veranda, watching the scene. He was 17, his robes slightly too large for his slender frame, his hands hidden in his sleeves to guard against the cold. This temple, high in the mountains and far from the village below, had been his home since he was a child. Yet tonight, watching the snow gather on the lanterns, he felt an unfamiliar pull, as though the snow itself carried whispers, as though the lanterns bore memories he could almost hear. Chapter 1: The Silent Duty. The stone lanterns had always been part of Akira's daily life. He swept around them each morning, brushed fallen leaves from their bases in autumn, and in spring, he cleared moss that clung to their grooves. The head monk, Master Daisetsu, often reminded him care for the lanterns, Akira. They are the eyes of the garden. Long before we were here, they stood. Long after we are gone, they will remain. Akira nodded, but he often wondered what use were lanterns that no longer bore flame. The oil had long since run out, and the monks had ceased lighting them. Yet the master insisted they must be tended, as if their silence was itself sacred. That night, as snow continued to fall, Akira dreamed of the lanterns. In his dream, their hollow chambers glowed faintly, not with fire, but with voices, thousands of voices murmuring as though waiting to be heard. He woke with a start, snowflakes drifting in through the half-open shutter. Chapter 2: The Girl at the Gate. 2 days later, while sweeping snow from the temple path, Akira saw a figure approach through the falling flakes. A girl, not much younger than himself, her cloak dusted with snow, her dark hair bound loosely at her shoulders. She bowed politely. "Excuse me. Is this the Temple of the Stone Lanterns?" Akira blinked in surprise. Few visitors came in winter, and fewer still asked about the lanterns. "Yes. This is Shaunji. The lanterns stand in the garden." The girl smiled faintly, though her eyes held something heavier, as though she had traveled not just through snow, but through grief. "My name is Yumi. My grandmother used to tell me stories of this place that the lanterns can hold memories." Akira felt a chill that was not from the cold. The words echoed his dream. "They are old. Perhaps too old for stories. Still," she said softly, "I would like to see them." Chapter 3: Snow and Silence. Together, they stepped into the garden. The snowfall had grown heavier, cloaking every branch, every stone. The lanterns rose from the white ground like guardians, each bearing its crown of snow. Yumi walked among them as though tracing familiar steps, her fingers brushing against their cold surfaces. She paused before one lantern, its carved window filled with drifting snow. "This one," she whispered. "My grandmother said it once held the light at her wedding. She came here with my grandfather, long ago." Akira stared at her, then at the lantern. He had tended it countless times, yet never thought it might have held someone's memory. "Do you hear it?" Yumi asked suddenly. "Hear what?" The voice. Like snow falling inside stone. Akira strained to listen. At first, only the wind. Then, faintly, a murmur like distant bells, or perhaps his own heartbeat. He remembered his dream. Chapter 4: Master Daisetsu's Warning. That evening, Akira told Master Daisetsu what had happened. The old monk listened in silence, his eyes deep and unreadable. "You heard the lanterns?" Akira hesitated. "Yes. It was faint, but real. And the girl, she heard them too." Daisetsu's expression hardened. "The lanterns are not toys. They bear what is too heavy for the living to carry. To listen is to risk being burdened by what was never yours." "But Yumi, enough." The monk's voice was firm. "Do not guide her further. The snow has a way of tempting those who are lost. Some voices must remain buried." Yet that night, Akira could not sleep. He thought of Yumi's face in the snowlight. Her eyes filled with longing, and the way the lanterns had seemed to lean toward her, as if recognizing her presence. Chapter 5: A Shared Secret. Despite Daisetsu's warning, Akira met Yumi again. She returned the next morning, and the morning after that, carrying offerings of flowers, her breath misting in the winter air. They walked together among the lanterns, listening. Sometimes the voices were faint sighs, sometimes sharper, almost words. Yumi confided in him. "My grandmother passed away last autumn. Before she died, she told me to find the lantern she once lit and listen. She said I would understand something I could not yet know." Akira felt torn between duty and curiosity. Yet when Yumi looked at him, her eyes luminous with unshed tears, he could not turn her away. That night, for the first time, he placed his hand upon the stone of a lantern and let the whisper seep into him. He heard laughter. Children running, bells ringing, the hum of a wedding song. A woman's voice gentle, strong. He pulled his hand away, trembling. Chapter 6: The Burden of Memory. In the days that followed, Akira listened more. Each lantern held something different: a farewell whispered in snow, the cry of a child, a promise left unfulfilled. At times, the voices were beautiful. At times, unbearable. He understood now why Master Daisetsu had warned him. Some nights, he woke drenched in sweat, the voices echoing still in his mind. Yet Yumi's presence steadied him. Together, they bore the whispers, speaking softly of what they heard. One evening, standing by the oldest lantern, Yumi placed her hand against its snow-laden crown. "I hear her," she whispered. "My grandmother calling my name." Her face glowed with both grief and peace, as though the snow itself had lifted a weight from her. Chapter 7: The Breaking Point. The snowstorm came without warning. For 3 days and nights, the mountain was buried under relentless white. The temple groaned under its weight, paths vanished, and silence deepened. Akira ventured into the garden only once during the storm. The lanterns were nearly swallowed by snow, only their rounded tops visible. Yet even through the storm's howl, he heard the voices louder now, urgent, pressing. It was too much. He fell to his knees in the snow, clutching his ears. When he opened his eyes, Yumi was there, her cloak whipping in the wind. She reached for him, her hands warm against his frozen skin. "Akira, listen with me." Don't carry it alone." Together, they pressed their palms against the same lantern. The voices surged like a river, but this time they did not drown him. He realized the truth: the lanterns were not prisons, but vessels, holding memory so that the living could release it together. Chapter 8: Light in the Snow. When the storm finally passed, the sky cleared to a brilliance of stars. The snow in the garden gleamed like silver, and the lanterns seemed to shimmer faintly, as though lit from within. For the first time in generations, a monk lit a flame within one lantern. Akira's hand trembled as he struck the spark, but when the fire took hold, it burned steadily and gently. The snow around it glowed with warmth. Yumi smiled, tears glistening. They remember. And now they are remembered. Akira understood. The lanterns had never been empty. They had always borne the weight of memory. But memory, once honored, could shine again like light in snow. Epilogue: Snowfall over the stone lanterns. Years later, villagers once more visited the temple. They brought offerings, prayers, and sometimes only silence. The garden became a place where grief could rest and joy could endure, carried by the stone lanterns beneath the snow. Akira, now a young monk, tended the lanterns with reverence. Yumi, though she did not remain at the temple, often returned, her presence as constant as the seasons. On winter nights, when snow fell silently upon the garden, Akira would pause his sweeping, breathe in the cold air, and listen. The lanterns whispered still. But now, the voices no longer burdened him. They guided, comforted, and reminded him that in silence, memory glows as softly as fire beneath the snow. And so the garden endured. And so the lanterns shone forever, crowned in white, forever bearing the whispers of time. The quiet bridge at dawn. Prologue: Mist over the river. The river flowed silently beneath the cover of early dawn. Mist drifted above the water, soft as silk, catching faint hues of rose and amber as the first light crept over the mountains. A bridge of old wood spanned the current, its planks worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. The bridge had seen lovers and wanderers, merchants and monks, peasants and poets. Yet at this hour, before the village awoke, it was utterly still. Kenji stood at its center, his breath clouding in the cold air. He was 20, but his eyes carried the weariness of a man older, shaped by years of quiet labor and silent loss. His family had tilled the fields near the river for generations, and though his hands were rough and strong, his spirit was restless. He came here every morning before the sun rose, listening to the river beneath, watching the mist curl and fade. He came not for prayer, nor for ritual, but for something unspoken, a search for clarity that only the dawn seemed able to provide. And so the story begins on this quiet bridge at dawn, where silence and memory converge. Chapter 1: The Footsteps of Yesterday. Kenji's father had once brought him here when he was a boy. He remembered standing on tiptoe, peering through the wooden rails at the current, while his father's voice rumbled low. This bridge holds more than wood and nails, Kenji. It holds memory. Every footstep leaves something behind. At the time, Kenji had laughed, not understanding. A bridge was just a way across, nothing more. But years later, after his father passed away, Kenji returned to the bridge and realized what he meant. When he walked its planks alone, he could almost hear echoes of his father's steps. Now, each morning, he walked slowly, carefully, as though placing his weight into memory itself. But lately, he noticed something else: he was not always alone. Sometimes, faint impressions in the mist suggested another presence. A figure at the far end, never clear, never close. Perhaps a traveler, perhaps a spirit. He could not tell. Yet he felt drawn, as though the bridge itself wanted him to listen more closely. Chapter 2: The Girl by the Water. One morning, as the mist thinned into pale light, Kenji saw her clearly. A girl sat by the water's edge, her kimono faded but neat, her hair tied loosely. She seemed no older than he, though her posture was heavy with quiet thought. She turned at the sound of his steps. "You come here every morning," she said, her voice as soft as the river. Kenji hesitated. Few strangers visited this bridge, and fewer still spoke first. "Yes. And you?" She smiled faintly. "I wait for someone. The river carries voices, if you listen. I thought perhaps the bridge might too." Her words struck something deep in him. He had never spoken of the voices he thought he heard, the faint echoes of footsteps past. "What do you hear?" he asked. She looked back at the water, her reflection wavering in the current. "My brother's voice. He left years ago, promising to return. I think his footsteps must have crossed here. If I listen hard enough, perhaps I can follow them." Kenji said nothing. But in his heart, he wondered if perhaps their searches were not so different. Chapter 3: The Bridge of Echoes. Days passed, and the girl, her name was Aiko, continued to appear at dawn. Together, they stood on the bridge in silence, listening. Kenji began to notice the subtleties of sound: the creak of old wood beneath their feet, the murmur of water striking the supports, the soft hiss of wind through the rails. Within these sounds, there were layers, tones and fragments, like distant voices weaving in and out. One morning, Aiko placed her hand upon the railing and closed her eyes. "Do you feel it?" "The bridge remembers." Kenji mirrored her gesture. His palm pressed against the cold wood, and suddenly he felt warmth, not physical, but something deeper, like the echo of countless lives. Laughter, sorrow, promises whispered in haste. 1,000 mornings layered into one. The bridge was not silent. It was alive with memory. Chapter 4: The Monk's Warning. Not long after, an old monk from the nearby temple crossed paths with them. His robes were patched, his staff worn smooth. He paused on the bridge, studying the two young figures standing side by side. "You linger here often," he said. "Be wary." Kenji bowed respectfully. "Why so, master?" The monk tapped his staff against the planks. Bridges are thresholds. They belong to neither side nor the other. They draw what is left behind, and what seeks passage. If you listen too closely, you may hear not only memory, but longing. Longing can trap the heart. Aiko lowered her gaze, her hands tightening on the railing. Kenji saw her shoulders tremble slightly. "We mean no harm," Kenji said, though unease pricked him. "No harm is needed," the monk replied softly. "Only a heart that cannot let go." With that, the monk passed into the mist, his figure swallowed by dawn. Chapter 5: The Voice of the River. Aiko came less often after the monk's warning, but Kenji continued his visits. When she did appear, her presence was quieter, as though weighed down. One morning, she whispered, "I think I heard him. My brother." His voice was clear. He said my name. Kenji searched her eyes, uncertain. "Are you sure?" "I am." Her voice trembled, but her gaze held firm. "He is close. I must keep listening." Kenji wanted to tell her that the voices were only echoes, fragments of memory. But he remembered his father's words and the warmth beneath his palm on the railing. Who was he to say what the bridge could or could not carry? And yet, he feared for her. For himself. Chapter 6: The Storm at Dawn. The storm came suddenly, a night of rain and wind that lashed the village. By dawn, the river was swollen, the mist replaced by churning spray. Kenji hurried to the bridge, fearing its frail planks might have been swept away. But the bridge still stood, trembling under the river's roar. And there was Aiko, standing in the storm, her hair and robes drenched, her gaze fixed on the water. "Aiko!" Kenji shouted, struggling against the wind. "It's dangerous." She turned, her face streaked with rain and tears. "I hear him. He's calling. I must follow." Before Kenji could stop her, she stepped toward the railing, leaning out over the torrent. He lunged forward, grabbing her arm, pulling her back onto the planks. "No," he cried. "If you go, you'll be lost." Her sobs shook her frame, her voice breaking. "But if I stay, I'll never see him again." The storm howled, and the bridge groaned, but Kenji held her tightly, refusing to let go. Chapter 7: The Dawn After the Storm. When the storm finally passed, the river returned to its steady flow, calmer though swollen. The bridge had held. Aiko sat at its center, her eyes hollow with exhaustion. Kenji remained beside her, silent. At last, she whispered, "Perhaps the monk was right. I've been chasing longing, not memory." Kenji placed his hand on the railing once more. The wood was damp, but steady. "The bridge carries voices, yes. But not so we may follow them into the past. It carries them so we may remember, and still cross to the other side." Aiko looked at him, her eyes filling with both grief and something softer, like dawn itself. "Then perhaps," she said, "it is enough to have listened." Epilogue: The Quiet Bridge at Dawn. Years later, the bridge still stood, though its planks bore new marks, its rails worn by new hands. Travelers came and went, villagers crossed with baskets and burdens, and children ran laughing across its span. Kenji, now older, sometimes stood there again at dawn, his hands resting on the railing. The mist rose, the river whispered, and the echoes of footsteps long past stirred gently in the air. He listened, not to chase, but to honor. The bridge remembered, and so did he. And in that stillness, beneath the pale light of dawn, the bridge remained what it had always been, a place between worlds, where silence spoke, and memory lingered like mist over water. Petals carried by the wind. Prologue. The blossoms begin to fall. The village lay nestled between mountains, where spring always arrived as a quiet miracle. Cherry blossoms bloomed in great clouds of pink and white, their petals drifting across roofs, streams, and pathways. Each gust of wind scattered them like snow, a fleeting storm that filled the air with beauty destined to vanish. Haruto stood beneath one of the great trees near the riverbank, his gaze following the petals. They reminded him of the days already gone, childhood afternoons by the water, laughter that echoed between wooden houses, and faces that time had stolen. The blossoms carried memory, and the wind seemed to whisper all things must move forward. And yet, Haruto lingered, caught between the past and the future, between grief and renewal. Chapter 1. The Riverbank Encounter. On the third day of blossoms, Haruto noticed a girl by the river. She sat on a smooth stone, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her kimono pale as the blossoms themselves. When the wind swept the petals across the water, she lifted her hand to catch them, as though each petal held a secret worth keeping. Haruto approached quietly. "You'll never hold them all," he said. The girl looked up, startled at first, but then she smiled faintly. "I know. But still, I try. Each petal carries something. Perhaps a wish." Her name was Yumi. She was new to the village, having come with her grandmother to escape the bustle of the town. Haruto had never seen her before, yet in that moment, it felt as though she had always been there, part of the same wind, the same blossoms. Chapter 2. Voices of the Past. Haruto began to meet Yumi often at the riverbank. They spoke of small things, how quickly the blossoms faded, how the river mirrored the sky, how the mountains seemed to hold the village in their arms. But beneath these words lay heavier truths. "My father used to bring me here," Haruto admitted one morning. "He told me the petals reminded him that nothing lasts forever. He wanted me to accept that." "And do you?" Yumi asked gently. Haruto looked at the drifting petals, his voice low. "I want to. But when I remember him, I can't help but wish that something would last." Yumi lowered her gaze. "I think that's why I try to catch them. Because part of me refuses to let go." In their confessions, the silence between them grew softer, no longer empty but filled with understanding. Chapter 3. The Festival of Blossoms. The village prepared for its annual spring festival, when lanterns were strung along the river and families gathered to honor the fleeting beauty of the season. Children ran with laughter, old songs filled the air, and the blossoms fell more heavily with each gust of wind. Haruto walked with Yumi among the lanterns. The petals clung briefly to the glowing paper before slipping into the river's current, carried away into the night. "Do you ever wonder where they go?" Yumi asked, her hand brushing against the railing of the bridge. "Farther than we can follow," Haruto replied. "Perhaps," she said, her eyes reflecting the lantern light, "but maybe they carry us too, in some way." It was the first time Haruto realized that Yumi's presence eased the weight of memory. The blossoms no longer seemed only a reminder of loss, they were also a promise of renewal. Chapter 4: The Storm and the Farewell. The blossoms never lasted long. Within a week, a storm swept through the valley, tearing the petals from the branches in great torrents. The river ran thick with pink and white, as though the trees had emptied their very hearts into the current. Yumi stood beneath the tree with Haruto, clutching her sleeves tightly. "My grandmother says we must return to the town soon," she said. "She misses home. And I must go with her." Haruto's chest tightened. He wanted to speak, to protest, but the storm carried away his words. Instead, he whispered, "Then the wind carries you too." Yumi looked at him, her eyes shimmering like the river. "And will you remember me?" He nodded, his voice steady though his heart trembled. "As long as the petals fall, I will." Chapter 5: Seasons Turning. Yumi left with her grandmother the next morning. Haruto walked once more to the river bank, the branches now bare, the ground littered with fading petals. For a time, the village seemed emptier. But as days passed, new buds began to appear, green and small, promising another cycle. Haruto continued to visit the river, listening to the wind, watching the water. The petals had gone, but their memory lingered, as did Yumi's. He realized then what his father had meant. Nothing lasts forever, but in moving forward, we carry fragments of what we love, like petals borne by the wind. Epilogue: The blossoms return. A year later, spring returned, and once again the trees bloomed in clouds of pink. Haruto walked to the riverbank at dawn, the air cool, the petals drifting around him. And there, sitting on the same stone by the water, was Yumi. Her kimono pale as before, her smile soft and uncertain. "I have come back," she said simply. The wind stirred, carrying blossoms between them. Haruto felt the weight of memory lift, replaced by something brighter. Together, they stood beneath the falling petals, not to hold them, not to stop them, but to let them drift, to let them carry their hearts into the unknown. The petals, as always, danced with the wind, fleeting, beautiful, eternal in their transience. The pine grove's gentle breath. Prologue: Whispers among the pines. At the edge of the mountain village, where fields of rice gave way to forest, stood an ancient pine grove. The trees stretched tall and unbending, their needles whispering whenever the wind passed through. To the villagers, the grove was more than a cluster of trees, it was a living spirit, a guardian that had watched over them for generations. Haruto had grown up with the sound of the grove in his ears. On nights when the air was still, he could almost hear the sigh of the pines through the window of his family's house. As if they spoke words just beyond human comprehension. The villagers often said that the pine grove carried the voices of their ancestors, their wisdom mingled with the wind. And so, one spring evening, when Haruto first heard his name carried within that whisper, he felt a shiver that was not entirely fear. It was a calling. Chapter 1: The Boy by the Grove. Haruto was 17 when the whispers grew clearer. He had spent most of his life helping his father in the fields, mending tools, and gathering firewood at the edge of the forest. Yet, the grove always drew him in. He would linger after his work, standing among the tall trunks, breathing in the resinous scent of the needles. There was comfort in the way the branches swayed together, as if the trees moved in rhythm with one breath. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in muted gold, Haruto paused at the grove's entrance. He thought he heard words within the wind. "Stay, child, listen." He froze. His heart pounded. Was it imagination? Or something older than memory? The villagers often told tales of the grove, how travelers who listened too deeply sometimes lost themselves, wandering until dawn. But Haruto did not feel fear, only a strange belonging. Chapter 2: A Meeting in the Shadows. Days later, while fetching water from the stream that wound through the grove, Haruto saw someone he had never noticed before. A girl, no older than he, sat by the water's edge. Her kimono was pale green, blending with the shadows of pine needles. She hummed softly, her song weaving with the rustle of branches. Startled, Haruto asked, "Who are you?" The girl turned, her eyes bright and clear as morning dew. "Do you not know? I live here. I am part of the grove." Haruto frowned. "That can't be. No one lives in the forest." But the girl only smiled, her hair shimmering as the wind carried pine needles around her. "Perhaps not as you do. But still, I live." From then on, Haruto returned often. The girl's name, she said, was Aoi. Each time he visited, she was there sitting among the roots, or weaving garlands of needles, or listening to the murmur of the branches. She spoke of the forest as though it were a family. "The trees breathe with us. If you listen, you'll hear it too, the gentle breath of the grove." Chapter 3: Lessons of the Wind. Through Aoi, Haruto began to notice things he had overlooked all his life. The shift of the wind through the pines was not random, it followed unseen patterns, as though carrying hidden messages. The roots beneath the soil connected the trees like veins, sharing strength and memory. The resin that seeped from the bark was not just sap, but the grove's lifeblood. "Why do you show me this?" Haruto asked one evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge. Aoi's expression softened. "Because the grove remembers you. Because it chose you." Her words sent a tremor through him. "Choose me for what?" "To carry its voice, when the time comes." Haruto could not answer. He only listened, the pine needles brushing against one another in the twilight, echoing a truth he was not ready to face. Chapter 4: Shadows of Change. That summer, the village suffered. The rains were heavy, flooding the fields. Crops withered, and the river swelled dangerously close to the homes. The elders gathered, debating what had angered the mountain spirits. Some whispered of the grove that it had grown restless. The villagers spoke of strange sounds at night, of shadows shifting among the trunks. Haruto kept his visits to Aoi secret. But one evening, she appeared troubled. "The grove is uneasy," she said, her eyes lowered. "Something disrupts the balance. If it continues, both the forest and your village will suffer." "What must I do?" Haruto asked, desperate. Aoi looked at him, her gaze steady as the roots beneath her. "You must listen more deeply than you ever have. The grove will tell you." That night, Haruto lay awake, the sigh of the pines filling his dreams. Chapter 5: The Breath of the Grove. At dawn, Haruto entered the grove alone. He walked until the village sounds faded, until only the rustle of branches and the distant call of birds remained. He knelt, pressing his palm to the soil. The scent of pine needles filled his lungs. And then he heard it low and vast, like the breath of a sleeping giant. The grove's voice filled him, carrying images rather than words, roots twisted by rising water, stones displaced by the river's rage, balance breaking. The grove showed him what must be done. Stones must be placed along the river bank, channels dug to guide the water, and trees planted anew to strengthen the soil. When Haruto returned to the village, he told the elders what he had seen. Though doubtful, they followed his plan, for desperation left no room for pride. Together, the villagers worked. Slowly, the river calmed. The fields drained. Life returned. Chapter 6: The Farewell Beneath the Pines. When the danger passed, Haruto returned to the grove, eager to see Aoi. She stood among the trees, her figure shimmering like sunlight through needles. "You heard them," she said softly. "You became their voice." Haruto stepped closer. "Then stay with me. Help me protect the grove, the village." But Aoi shook her head. Her smile was tender, though sorrow lingered in her eyes. "I was never meant to stay. I am the breath of the pines, nothing more. Now that you have heard, you no longer need me." Haruto's chest tightened. "But I..." "Listen," she whispered. "Whenever the wind stirs the needles, I am there. That is enough." And as the wind rose, scattering pine needles around him, Aoi faded into the air, her presence dissolving into the grove's eternal breath. Epilogue: The grove's gentle breath. Years passed. Haruto grew into a man and then into the village elder. The people came to him for guidance, for he carried a calmness that seemed born from the forest itself. And always, when the wind passed through the grove, he paused. He listened. Within the sigh of the needles, he sometimes thought he heard Aoi's laughter, soft and fleeting, like a memory carried on the breeze. The grove breathed, and Haruto breathed with it, two lives intertwined, one human, one eternal. The villagers still spoke of the pine grove as a guardian. But Haruto knew the truth: it was not merely a guardian, but a companion, teacher, and voice. And in every whisper of the pines, in every gentle breath of the grove, he felt the presence of the girl who had once sat by the stream, waiting for him.